I'm a con, an ex-prisoner, and I've spent the last 5 years in a prison with other violent men. I don't even know how to live by myself yet. I'm still learning not to respond in violence when someone bothers me or insults me. No, I'm not the father you remember. Dad, please. I want to see you, talk to you. I want to get to know you again. I was just a kid when you went away. I'm 15 now, almost a man. Let me come to where you are. Just once. At least one time. There was silence from the other end and though he had hung up. I was about to say something more when he said, "Let me think about this for a while. I promise, I'll call you back. I need to decide what is best. Is that okay? Can you wait?" Of course I could wait if I had to. I didn't want to though, but I did want to see him, and if I got too pushy, he would just hang up and ignore me like adults did. Sure, Dad. I can wait. I'll keep the phone turned on. It's best if you call during the afternoon. Mom is usually working then, so it'll be private. Is that okay? That's just perfect. So, I'll call you. There was a pause again, not very long this time, before he said, "Goodbye, son." I pushed the end button on the phone and just stared at it. So what did he say? What did he say to you? Come on, Ruben. What did he say? Eddie was hopping around me, waving his hands in frustration. He said he'd think about it and call me back. I know he's going to let me see him. I just know it. I'll get to see my dad. Ruben, he's a real tough guy, an ex-con. He almost beat a guy to death for shitting in his yard. That's cool, man. That's real cool. Eddie was grinning from ear to ear, but I didn't like the words he was using. Stop it, Eddie. He's my dad, not an ex-con. You just forget that part. It's no one's business but his and mine. You can know, but you have to forget it. Sure, Rube, I'll keep it secret, just between you and me. And if he comes, you have to introduce me. You promise? Sure, I promise. But I knew that if he called me back, I would keep it between him and me. My dad. I was going to see my dad after all these years. I was on pins and needles for the next few days waiting for his call. It was a Monday afternoon, just a week since I talked to him, and I had begun to think he was not going to call me back when my phone finally rang. It was just past 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I was on my way home from school. Eddie was not with me today, since he had band practice on Monday and Wednesday. I was alone and in no hurry to go home to an empty house. Hi, Dad. Is that you? Sure is. Can you talk? Where are you right now? I'm alone and walking home. Mom doesn't get home for another hour and a half. I have a lot of time. Good. I've given it a lot of thought and I do want to see you. I just want to get together once to say some things to you that are important, but I want you to understand that this is not an attempt to get our family back together. I know that is what you want, but it's not going to happen. Do you understand that? If you don't, I won't do this. I wasn't ready to accept that, but I was smart enough to know I had to go along with him right now if I wanted to see him. I answered him, telling him what he wanted to hear. Sure, Dad. I understand. I won't tell Mom or anyone. Just tell me what you want me to do. Okay, you get out of school at 3 o'clock and you walk home from there. You call your mom and let her know you're there. Is that right? How do you know all that? Who told you? I was really surprised at what he seemed to know. Was he already here? Was he watching me right now? I know a lot of people and they do favors for me. I had someone do some checking on you. That's all. Is what I said right? Yes. It's pretty close. So, what do I do? Nothing out of the ordinary. I'll be there one day next week. Just do what you always do and I'll find you. It's best if you don't know exactly when. Do you understand? My heart was pounding with joy and I was walking on air as I assured him I understood. I would keep this a secret from Eddie, and of course Mom could never know. I headed home, happy and content. I could wait another week. It had been almost 7 years since I saw my dad. 7 years. Now I was going to be with him. Meanwhile, Nancy. I had just finished washing one of the dogs, getting him ready for neutering when Ruben called. It was a cute little poodle, a miniature white almost 10 months old. He was happy now, not knowing what was coming. Actually, it didn't hurt and they never knew anything was done. I pulled him out of the tub, wrapped him with a towel, and put him down on the table where I would use the blow dryer to complete the job. His tongue was trying to reach my face as I rubbed him with the soft towel. I flipped open my cell, and held it to my ear while I completed the job on the poodle. He was quiet and almost asleep, enjoying the attention. "Hello, honey. Are you home?" "Yeah, Mom. I'm home. What do you want to do about dinner? Want me to start anything? Or do you want me to call for takeout?" His voice always gave me a feeling of comfort just knowing he was safe and home where he belonged. He was getting older and would soon be going out more and more, but until then, he was mine. I treasured him. He was my life now and had been for the past 7 years. Ever since? That sounds good. Why don't you call for Italian since you like that so well? I'll stop on the way and pick it up. Sound good? Sure, Mom. I'll get the pasta and the garlic bread you like so well. I'm having the meatball sandwich. I'll see you when you get here. Honey, bye. I dropped the phone into my hand and put it back in my pocket while I finished brushing out the poodle. He was a sweet dog and made no fuss when I put him back in the cage to wait for his operation. I cleaned up around the table and the cages before clocking out. I was done at 4:30 and the late shift would cover the actual operation. We did a few during the day, but we primarily handled the examinations and the shots. I did x-rays, some teeth cleaning, and a few shots, but more often assisted Dr. Jane, the veterinarian. She gave me this job and made sure I learned the ropes. She was a lifesaver for me at a time in my life when I was at my lowest. I never told her the whole story, just that my actions had caused my husband to divorce me, and that was that. She didn't press me in any way and simply offered me an ear if I wanted one. I changed out of my uniform and into my street clothes and then shut my locker. There were 8 of us all together, so we each had a locker and a mail slot of our own. I didn't bother to get a lock for the door and just trusted my coworkers to leave my stuff alone. So far, nothing had been touched and I had no reason to believe it would be otherwise. I punched the time clock, waved goodbye to the 2 girls that had come on for second and left. I was talking to myself, going over the things I had to do on the way home when my cell phone rang. That was a surprise since no one but my son had the number. The called ID was registering only that the call came from Columbus. No identification of the caller. I debated on answering, thinking it was probably a blind call from some salesman. I finally shrugged, flipped it open and answered. "Hello? This is Nancy. How can I help you?" Just like in the office. There was a moment of silence, and I repeated my greeting. "Hello, is anyone there?" This time someone cleared their throat and then, "Nan, this is Carmine." I stopped so quick I almost fell forward. My heart had started pounding. My face felt flushed and hot like I had been running, and I realized I hadn't let out the breath I was holding. I had to say something. Anything. Carmine? Is this really you?" As if I didn't recognize his voice. I had heard it over and over the last 7 years. I could hear his voice on the phone telling me that there was an accident and he had to stay and help. I was angry because I wanted him to take me shopping. It was the last thing he said to me, and it made me angry. I wanted to go shopping. Shopping. God help me, that was what I was thinking at the time. It's really me. I had to call you to let you know that Ruben contacted me. Did you know he did that? Did he tell you? His voice was calm, without anger or condemnation. It was still his voice, and it sounded like the old Carmine. There was no anger, no pain, nothing out of the ordinary. But I didn't hear the love that I used to hear either. Why did I think there would be anything left after all this time? No, I didn't know. How did he contact you? And what did he want? And how did you know my cell number? I never gave it to anyone but Ruben. Did he tell you to call me? No, he has a cell phone. One of those prepaid things anyone can buy. I don't know how he activated it, but he did. He called the prison, got the name and number of my parole officer, and then called him. He told me and I called Ruben. This was so much information to take in all at once. My husband, who I hadn't talked to in almost 7 years, calls me to tell me my son had called him. He was out of prison. He was out of prison. And my son knew and called him. Ruben called his father. I was still standing in the parking lot, staring off into space, trying to find some way to make sense of this. God, Carmine was out of prison. That was the only thing I could think of. Ruben called him, but Ruben was a very intelligent boy, and he had been taking care of himself for some time. I had no worries about him. And that he called his dad? Why wouldn't he? He never stopped loving his father, no more than I did. I was surprised that he had a cell phone, but not surprised that he called. Well, I'm not surprised, Carmine. You walked away from us 7 years ago, but he never forgot you. He asked about you for several years after you left, but I thought he had finally given up. I had no idea what happened to you since you refused any contact, and the prison simply said you wanted no contact with me. I didn't even know you pleaded guilty and went to prison until I went to the jail to see if you needed anything. A guard had to tell me. No one else would. And now you're out of jail and I had no idea. I gave up years ago trying to get you to talk to me, Carmine. I guess Ruben didn't. Carmine didn't answer right away. I waited and waited, but he didn't say anything. I decided he had all he wanted of me, so I said, I guess that's all? Just to let me know Ruben contacted you? Well, I'll talk to him and tell him you have no desire to see him or me. That should make his life a lot simpler. Still nothing. Well, I don't know what I expected. I was ready to hang up the phone when Carmine said something that shook me to the core. Wait, Nan, please. I'm sorry that I'm not always as polite as I should be. It takes time after 5 years in that place. I sometimes forget to answer people when I talk to them, especially when I don't know them very well. He sounded so sad at that. I felt my heart break for him for what he had to endure. But then to go there was his choice. I still felt bad for him, knowing I was the one at fault in the first place. I told Ruben that I would like to see him again. I told him that I would tell him when. I would like to see you as well, if that would be all right with both of you. Oh God, please don't do this. How could I stand to see him again without breaking down? How could I refuse? How could I not refuse? I had built a life without him. A life that was less than I would like, but a life nevertheless. I had learned to be without him after years of trying. Now he wanted to see us. I couldn't see him again. Ruben couldn't see him. He wasn't going to stay with us as a family, so I had to stop this before it broke Ruben's heart. I had to say the only thing I could think of to say without destroying my carefully built life. I had to tell him to stay away from us and never contact us again. That's what I had to tell him. Of course I did. That would be fine, Carmine. We could meet you wherever you want. Just tell me when and where. Let me call you back. I'll have to arrange with my parole officer to travel to see you. He should let me do that. I'll call you tomorrow. It was good talking to you again, Nancy. Goodbye. Before I could say anything, he was gone. Just as quickly as he entered my life, he was gone again. But he said he would call tomorrow. He would call. I would wait to talk to Ruben until I heard from him again. I wasn't going to get his hopes up for nothing. I drove home to my son, and we shared a meal of pasta and meatballs with lots of cheese and lots of sauce. Ruben always ordered extra garlic bread, and he loved their lemonade. He ate with lots of energy and lots of talking and lots of innuendo. I knew he had talked with Carmine, but he didn't know I knew, and he was bursting at the seams to tell me. But he also believed I would be angry with him, so he kept it to himself with difficulty. I smiled inside at the happiness I could feel radiating from him. He had talked with his dad. Now let's listen the story from Carmine's perspective. I decided that I had better call Nan before going any further towards seeing Ruben, my son. If she got it in her head I was trying to go around her to talk to Ruben, she could make trouble for me with my PO. I didn't want any trouble at this stage that could land me back in prison. I didn't need that, and I didn't want to give her the wrong idea. While I never hated my time there, and the friends I made were good and valuable, I didn't want to go back to the loss of freedom. Just sitting at my kitchen table, looking out the window at the busy street was a joy that I rediscovered every morning. It was more than enough to convince me I never wanted to go back. So, before I lost my nerve, I got the number the PI left me and called her cell. She answered. We talked and the world didn't end, but it was harder to do than I ever expected. The phone call to Nan had gone better than I had hoped. She was still angry at me for cutting her off as I had, but I had no choice. She and Ruben were better off without me when I was in prison. It was entirely possible that I might never make it out of there, especially the first year or two. Things happened in prison, and they were rarely talked about in polite society. I had been lucky, there was no doubt about that, but I had no way of knowing that was going to be the case. I took the only option available to me and cut myself off from both of them. It cost me more than they could ever know. At least they had each other. I had no one but myself. I had thought of my son a lot during those long nights when I had nothing to look forward to and nothing to occupy my mind. How had he grown? Was he a good kid? Did he have a lot of friends? Was he handsome and popular with the girls? Eileen told me a lot, and she had pictures. I treasured the pictures and I kept them safe and dry the whole time I was in, but they weren't the real thing. Even so, I had them still. I had no pictures of Nancy, and Eileen never mentioned any to me. She knew that's how I wanted it. I found out later that Nancy was the one that gave Eileen the pictures to give me. I wonder why she never included any with her in them. When I asked to see both of them, I think it was more of a surprise to me than it was to Nancy. She accepted and seemed anxious to meet, but I thought I heard a hesitation in her voice. I wondered if she would rather not see me at all. If that was the case, I could give her an out tomorrow when I called back. Just let her off the hook. That might be best. Yes, that might be what she preferred. The thought of seeing her again gave me a sudden boost of energy. I had tried to put her out of my mind all the time I was being held for trial. I was successful, telling my guards not to allow her back to see me. And I denied her attempts to bail me out before the trial started, just to avoid having to face her and see the cheating in her eyes. I made the deal putting me in prison just so I would not have to face her. It was not a brave thing to do, and any attempt to convince myself that I did it for them was false. I knew better. I knew the truth. I was afraid to face her. I was afraid she would tell me she didn't love me and that she wanted more than I was able to give her. I was afraid she would tell me that she loved that son of a bitch I almost killed. So I cut her out of my life. Ruben was a casualty of that fear. If he came, she would come with him, and I would be able to see the truth in her eyes. That would have killed me then. Now I had some things to consider. Eileen told me when she visited that Nancy had sold the house and moved to a small town east of Columbus. She and Ruben lived alone, and Nancy had gone to work at a vet's office. I wondered about that, knowing the amount of money that the house had brought and the insurance policy that would make up my salary. She had no money problems. She didn't need to work or to sell the house. When I asked Eileen, all she said was that Nancy wanted it this way. Nancy also wrote me a short note after I rejected her attempt to talk to her prior to the divorce. She wanted to let me know that she and Hugo had no further contact and that she had quit her job there. That made me happy. I distinctly remember getting that note from the doctor in the infirmary, and when I read it, I almost cried. She didn't love him. That was something. I kept that note, and I still have it in the box where I kept those things I brought out with me on the day I was released. They were kept in a prominent place in my small apartment. I looked at them every day and remembered and promised myself that it would never happen again. Through Eileen, she sent me notes every holiday, every birthday, every important event in my son's life. She let me know when he graduated from grade school. She sent me a copy of the article in the school paper when he was elected class treasurer. She sent me a birthday card on each of my birthdays. She sent me a Valentine's Day card, a Christmas card, and she told me what she got for him on each of his 6 birthdays. She told me about his best friend Eddie and how his family welcomed Ruben in as one of their own. She signed each one, "Love, your wife." I kept them all, every one, but I answered none of them. Now I was about to make the first major change in my life since I got out. Taking the job with Jason's clinic was easy. It meant getting out, getting my own place to live, and earning enough money to help me begin to live again. Doing the reconstructive work that made people's lives better was pleasure for me, not work. And I was good at it, and they appreciated it. They paid very well to show their appreciation. I was making more money than I had ever made, and I was satisfied doing what I loved. I didn't want or need the excitement of the emergency room anymore. I wanted peace and quiet and contentment. I had 2 of the 3 now, and that wasn't all bad. What I was about to do might well mess up my life. I decided to go over to my PO's office first thing in the morning and talk to him about what I planned to do. I thought Jack might be hesitant to allow me to go, but I hoped I could convince him of my good faith. He had begun to trust me, and he only called once or twice a month, and then he called first thing in the morning when he knew I was getting ready to go to work. He never embarrassed me by calling there, and he never tried to trip me up by calling at times he knew I would be out. I ate dinner out almost every night, and I ate breakfast at the clinic. I was in the apartment late in the evening, but not much more. He knew where I was, however, so he called when he knew he could reach me. As a matter of fact, we had beers together every couple of weeks. He knew me as well as anyone, and I liked to think that we could be friends once I was done with my probation. Jack was in his office, buried behind a pile of paperwork, his bald head just appearing over the top of one such stack. I found a clean chair to sit in and waited until he came up for air. "Carmine, what the hell? What are you doing here?" You're not due for. When the hell are you due? I forget. Not due for a few weeks, Jack. Need to ask you something and maybe get a favor from you. Mind if we talk? Go ahead. I need a break anyway. Want to go down the hall for a cup of coffee? Nah, I'd just like to get to it if you don't mind. Go. Talk to me. I want to go see my kid and his mom. The kid called me, as you know, and I talked to him. He sounds like a good kid and I'd like to see them both. I talked to Nancy, my ex, and told her Ruben had called me. Didn't want any problem from her thinking I'd done an end around on her. You know? Jack just stared at me for a few minutes, rubbing his chin and thinking. He finally grinned, slapped his hand down on the desktop, and looked quite pleased with himself. I knew it. Made a bet with the wife that you'd want to go see them. Bet a 20 on you, Carmine, old boy. You do me proud. Hot damn. He stood, rooted through his desk, and found what he was looking for. He pushed it across the desk to me. Fill this out when you make your plans and drop it off here before you leave. I'll approve a 5-day trip so long as you stay within the state of Ohio. Should be no problem since they live here. And make sure I have a phone number to reach you. I'll have to call at least once. No problem. I'll do like the kid did and get me one of those prepaid cells. Should be no problem, now that you let me get a credit card. Big frickin' deal. A credit limit of $300. Carmine, when are you going to learn? That card is one of those new check cards. It's good for whatever you have in your checking account. It will allow you to get cash with a limit of $300 a day, but you can buy any damn thing you want, and you can use it for gas or a motel room, stuff like that. We talked a little more, Jack cautioning me to take it slow with the kid, and with the ex, don't get angry and don't lose my temper. As if that was ever going to happen again. The prison shrinks made damn sure of that. I think my head would explode if I got really angry. But I was ready, and all I had to do was find the guts to make the trip. I waited until it was late before calling Nan back. I was hoping that Ruben would be in bed and I could talk to her without her having to tell him it was me. Silly. I know, but so what? I dialed the number and waited. She answered on the second ring. She had been waiting apparently. Was that a good sign? Hello, Carmine. Is that you? It's me. Sorry to be so late, but I had to go see my parole officer and still finish rounds at the clinic. I hope Ruben is in bed by now. He goes up early and does his homework, then talks to Eddie, his friend, or some of his other friends. Then he listens to music or watches a little TV. He's a good kid, Carmine. You'd be proud of him. You really would. I've always been proud of him, even when I was in the big house. I had the pictures you sent and all the clippings and other notes. Thank you for them. I valued them very much. It helped to pass the time. You're very welcome. I thought you would want to know as much as you could about him. I worried that it might be too painful for you, but you never asked Eileen to tell me to stop, so I kept on. I'm glad they helped you. They did. So did all the notes you wrote me. I got them all. I didn't answer, but I got them. I am glad. Did you make the plans yet? Are you coming to see Ruben? Yes. I have 5 days to spend with him when I come. I don't know how you feel about seeing me. I thought when I called earlier that I didn't give you a choice. I want you to know that I'll understand if you would rather me just see him. I don't want to force you to see me if you don't want to. So, if you want me to meet him someplace alone, that's okay. Why would you get that impression? I would love to see you. It's been your choice not to see or speak to me, Carmine, not mine. You know that. I know, but I was afraid to see you before. But time has passed and things are different now. I would like to see you both, and maybe you and I can be friends. I would like that very much. There was a silence on the other end, and I was afraid I had said too much. Damn, it was hard being sociable. In the pen, we said what we thought and screw the other guy if he didn't like it. We settled it privately. At least, some did. I had rank, and that gave me protection. So, I tried not to abuse the privilege. Carmine, just come when you can and let's take it from there.
Yeah, okay.
I am sorry. It's hard for me. I'll take next week off and travel on Sunday and be there Sunday night. I'll get a motel and call you from there. Would that be okay? That would be perfect. I can take Ruben out of school, but I would rather not. It's getting too close to finals, and he needs to be there. You can plan to pick him up after school and stay with him at our place until I get home. Then we can all talk together. Is that okay with you? You would trust me to pick him up alone? Without you? Carmine, you're his father. Of course I trust you. I would trust you with his life. Thank you. I have to go. Goodbye. I'll call when I get there. I had to hang up before I lost it. God. She sounded so sincere. She would trust me with his life? And I had gone to prison for almost killing a man with a baseball bat. How could she trust me? It was more than I could take, and I found myself sitting on the bed, crying like a baby. But then I remembered. I had plans to make and things to do. I was going to see my son and Nancy. Meanwhile, Nancy. He called. I waited all day and began to believe he was not going to call, but he did, and he was coming to see us both. He wanted me to be free to bow out and not have to see him. What the hell was that all about? Did he think I was afraid of him? That I didn't want to be with him again? How in the world could he come to that conclusion? He shut me out, not the other way around. And I told him I wanted nothing more to do with Hugo. I told him that and made sure he got the note. The doctor told me he made sure Carmine read it and understood it. So he knows that Hugo was never part of my or Ruben's life. But he was coming. I was going to be able to see him again and talk with him. I can hope that he will allow me to apologize for my mistakes and for making him go crazy. It was my fault that he spent all those years in prison, away from his life and his work and his son. It was my fault, and I had to let him know how sorry I was. I had to tell him that it was never anything he did that caused me to do something so stupid and so selfish. God, how selfish was I? Even now when I remember the way I was thinking back then, it makes me sick to my stomach. Sick and miserable. I wonder what he thinks about me now. Or if he even does think of me. And did he think of me during all those years? Like I thought of him? How many nights did he fall asleep? His hands holding his erection, wishing it were my hand holding him. As many as I did, using my fingers to ease the pain I felt from not having his body on mine. His hardness inside me where it belonged? All those years lost, the nights we could have been together, making love like we did before it all went to hell. Before I destroyed it all with my stupidity. And what made it even worse for me was that the last man inside me, the last man to have my body, wasn't even my husband. It was Hugo, the man that I let destroy my marriage and send the man I loved to prison. Hugo. Even now, that thought makes me sick. Sick at heart as well as sick to my stomach. When the memory surfaces, as it does on those days when the world seems to have it in for me, I end up on the floor in the bathroom, still wet from the shower that never seems to make me feel clean. And regardless of what they say, time hasn't made it any less. It is still as vivid in my memory as the day it happened. And I hate it. I pray that I can forget it, but so far my prayers haven't been answered. Enough. It was done and it was over. Stop wishing and saying sorry over and over. It doesn't help anything. And stop waiting for fate to come along and punish you so it can then forgive you. God doesn't punish the guilty and reward the innocent. That was for stories and books. In the real world, innocents like Carmine pay the price for the guilty like me. I stayed home, free to come and go as I pleased. Carmine was locked up for trying to protect what was his. Hugo got off scot-free taking something that didn't belong to him and paying no price. Sure, he got beat up, but a beating wasn't much to sacrifice for taking what wasn't his to take. And I paid no price at all, unless it was the price of losing the man I loved. But when I think of it that way, the price I paid was actually pretty stiff. Maybe there was something to that. Maybe God did punish the guilty. Now that he called, I had to tell Ruben. I had to tell him I knew his secret and that his dad wanted to see him and he was coming for 5 days. I wanted to tell him when he was home with me so that I could control his expectations. I didn't want him to go off half-cocked and plan on a reunification of our family. Carmine said it himself. He said that wasn't going to happen. He said it so that Ruben wouldn't get his hopes up. Nothing was said about my hopes. And my hopes were my business and I would take care of myself. Ruben was my real concern just now. Tomorrow. I would tell him tomorrow after school. Tomorrow was a Thursday, and that would give him 3 days to get ready. 3 days was nothing after the 7 years he had waited. Who was I kidding? 3 days was a lifetime for a kid. Should I wait until almost Monday? Would Carmine call when he got in? What if Ruben answered the phone? No, I would tell him tomorrow after school and be done with it. Good. Meanwhile, Ruben. Dad hasn't called back yet. I know he will. It's only been a week since I last talked with him. I would call him, but I don't know his number. He didn't give it to me when he called, and the caller ID said it was blocked. Whatever that means. But I know he'll call. He said he would, and I believe him. I just have to be patient. That's what Mom says all the time when I get antsy. Just be patient, she says. It will happen when it's supposed to happen. Sure. Just wait. Time goes so slow that it's hard to wait. But I have no choice. I'll wait. Why doesn't he call? At school today, it's a trip to see the water purification plant. Big deal. Like I care how they make the water good to drink. It's good to drink, so who cares? Anyway, I like the bottled water and I use my allowance to buy it as often as I can. Me and Eddie buy it and carry the bottles around all day. Sometimes I just fill the empty bottle with water from the fountain, but it's still better than tap water. I listen to the guy tell us all about the big tanks and the settling tanks and the algae and the chemicals, and I try to remember it all since the teacher will give us a quiz on it later. Fortunately, I have one of those memories that hangs on to crap like that. So, I'm really lucky that way. Eddie doesn't remember stuff. He has a real problem with it, and I have to help him all the time. But he's my friend, so I do it. No big deal. All of this is just background in my head. Dad's call is what I really worry about. Why doesn't he call? Of course, now is the wrong time for him since he knows I'm in school. But I keep the phone turned on even in school. No one but Eddie knows I have it, so no one can tell me to turn it off. He'll probably call tonight on the way home. I think that's when he'll call. It's been long enough, and he knows I'm waiting, so I think he'll call tonight. That's what I would do if it was me. I'd call tonight. The day drones on. Eddie is making smart remarks under his breath all the time, and I'm busting my gut trying not to laugh. He just wants to get me in trouble so he can rag on me. Shit, that was too funny not to laugh at. So I do, and now the teacher is glaring at me. Eddie is looking like sugar wouldn't melt in his mouth while she glares at me. He knows that I have to get even with him now. He knows, so he'll be on his guard. Makes it harder to get him back, but I will. Pretty soon, Eddie is talking to one of the girls in our class that he has a thing for. He wants us to double date sometime, but I tried to tell him my mom would have a kitten if I told her I was going out on a date. But there was this one girl. Anyway, after hours and hours of boring stuff, school is over and Eddie and I walk home. I have my cell in my hand and I'm looking at it, willing it to ring. It makes a sound like little bells ringing, so I'll know it's mine. Eddie watches me and looks disgusted. Come on, Rube. He'll call when he's ready. He's a con, and he's got to get permission to go anywhere. We don't know where he's at, so it might take him a lot of time to get it straightened out. You gotta wait, man. Yeah, I know that, but it's been almost a week since he said he'd call. You think he's changed his mind? Doesn't want to see me? Maybe that's it. He doesn't want to see me after all this time. No, man. He told you he'd call, and he will. You just gotta wait. He's the boss and he knows what's best. Just be sure you tell me when he comes. You hear? We walked along in silence, Eddie tossing a ball in the air while I just followed him. By the time it was time to split, Eddie going toward the nice homes while I went toward the apartments, he still hadn't called. I was disappointed, but Eddie just said to be patient. What choice did I have? I waved to him and headed home. Another hour or so before Mom got there, but she wanted to know I was home and safe. I had no beef with that because I knew it was just her way. I went in, shut and locked the door, and then called to let her know I was home. She seemed in good spirits when she answered and promised to have something exciting to tell me when she got home. Probably about one of her dogs or cats or birds or some such thing. Like I cared. At home, I left the phone turned on and laying on the table where it would stay until Mom got home. He still had time to call. He knew when Mom would be home, so he had time. I sat down with a Coke and watched the phone and waited. Patiently. But when I heard her car pull in and stop, I turned the phone off and hid it in my room, under the dresser. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe. Mom came in with a pizza and some salads. She usually fixed something during the week, but tonight she must not have had time. Maybe she had plans for us to do something else? Whatever. We had pizza. I loved pizza and didn't care why she made that choice. I got plates and napkins and we sat down to eat. Pepperoni and extra cheese, just like I preferred it. Pizza Hut too. Man, this was a treat. We sat and ate and I had 4 pieces to her 1.5. It was great. I sat back, full to the gills and smiled at Mom. Great meal, Mom. What do we owe this to? Pizza is a real treat and not something you do very often. Did you get a promotion or something? What's the occasion? Mom just smiled back at me, looking very pleased with herself. She looked down for a second and then she leaned back in her chair and said, "Guess what? I know you have a cell phone and I know you talk to your dad. Did you think you could keep a secret like that to yourself? Did you think your old mom wouldn't find out?" I was hit by surprise. How could she know? Who told her? Eddie? Never. He would never tell. So who? Who told you? Who told you about my cell and that dad called? Who? Now Mom was grinning from ear to ear. She laughed out loud and slapped the table in glee. "Your father told me. He called to tell me you contacted him and that he wanted to come see both of us. He wants to see us, Ruben. Your father is coming Sunday night to spend a week with us." "Really? Is he really coming this weekend? Dad is coming to see us? Where is he staying and how do we know where he'll be? Did he say where he was going to stay? Can he stay here with us? I'll give him my room and I can sleep on the couch or in your room. Can he? Please, Mom, can he?" "Ruben, calm down. I don't know where he will be staying, and he said he would call as soon as he gets here. He has 5 days to spend with us, so there will be plenty of time to decide those things once he gets here. But Ruben, you have to let him decide what he wants to do and where he wants to stay. You understand that he isn't coming home to us. He's coming to visit. That's all. Do you understand?" "Yes, okay. I am just excited to see him after all this time. I was just a little kid when he left. He won't recognize me now. How will he know it's me? I sent pictures. Aunt Eileen gave them to him so he knows what you look like now. He's your father, Ruben. He would know you anywhere. Now, let me tell you how it's going to be. First, you have to stay in school, but he will pick you up after school and bring you home. Then you and he can talk and get acquainted. You'll have plenty of time to get to know him and him to know you. I'll see both of you when I get home at my regular time. That's how it's going to be. Do you understand?" "Yes, I understand. He'll be there to pick me up after school. I can introduce Eddie to him. Eddie wants to meet him, and I said I would try. But if he picks me up at school, maybe both of us can ride home with him, and then Eddie can go on home. Would that be okay, Mom?" "That sounds perfect. Now, let's see what we have and what we have to get before he comes. Let's make a list." Meanwhile, Carmine. Now the die was cast. I had made my decision, and I had no choice but to follow through since I did want to see Ruben again. It had been more than 7 years since I had last seen him or talked with him, and he must have grown so. The pictures showed the boy that was Ruben, but he looked so different from the boy in my memory. I still thought of him as a 9-year-old child, but that was in the past. He was a boy, grown now into a young man of 15. He would be almost a stranger to me, and I to him. But that would pass quickly once I met him again. And Nancy, how would she see my coming back? I had shut her out when it all happened. Sure, I had my reasons and they were good ones, but would she understand them now? And what about what she did? How was I with that? While time had passed, so too had a lot of our plans and dreams. I had to admit to myself that when I tried to picture Nan now, nothing came to me. Maybe too much had passed for us to have any basis for friendship. Too many questions to answer and no foundation on which to base any answers. Whatever the future would hold, my path was ahead of me. There was no going back and no way to undo what had come and gone. I understood that we had all paid a price for what happened. And if I was to be honest about it, I considered the price paid in full. Whatever happened now was all new, and the past had no part in it. That was a lesson learned in prison, but it was an important one. We all believed it, and we all lived for it. I finished packing my meager belongings and threw the suitcase into the back of my pickup. I climbed in and started the engine, put the shift in drive, and I was on my way. I lived in the northwest part of Columbus, not far from the clinic, which was located closer in and near the Brookside Country Club. For me, this would be an easy trip, just a short drive to Groveport proper. I had reservations at a Holiday Inn and promised to be there before 6 in the evening. Should be no problem. I drove, feeling the freedom to do something I hadn't done since I got out. Travel. It was still a strange feeling at times, to be free to do whatever I wanted without someone checking. I arrived at the Holiday Inn at 5 o'clock and checked in, my credit card limit no longer a problem. Even so, old habits die hard, so to be safe, I could pay most of the room cost in cash and not test out my new credit card limit. To be certain there were no hitches, I gave the clerk $300 at check-in with instructions to use it before charging the card. The cute girl behind the counter smiled and nodded her understanding. Maybe this was not an unusual request. I found my room, unpacked my few belongings, and settled in. With little to do, and not wanting either Ruben or Nan to know I was here already, I decided to make a drive to where Ruben went to school, and then, maybe if I was feeling brave and adventurous enough, I could drive by their place and see where they were living. With that thought, I got into my truck and followed the directions Nan had given me to Ruben's school. 20 minutes later, I had successfully found the school and was now on my way to their address, tracing the route Ruben walked every day. I found the boulevard she said was the main one leading to her location, and after driving for several minutes, I saw the name of her street on the sign hanging across the intersection. I followed it for another half-mile before I saw the subdivision with its cluster of homes off to my right. I pulled into one of the streets, the name the same as her address, and in just a few more minutes, saw the place. It was a small, single-level home, nestled in with several more just like it. Hers was set back from the street a little more than its neighbors, and it was painted a light blue with darker blue shutters. It was neat, the yard and shrubs surrounding it well-tended, the entire picture one of a well-cared-for home. It was so different from the place we lived in before I went to jail. Not only the size and location, but just the whole idea of living in a place like this. That my son and my ex-wife lived there was a little hard for me to grasp. As I slowed, I saw two bikes sitting in the driveway next to the home. Inside the open garage door, I saw an older model Ford sedan. I continued slowly past and was rewarded with a glimpse into the backyard where I spotted two young boys sitting around a small table. They seemed to be playing with some sort of electronic game, and I could see the one I didn't know gesturing to the other. That would be Ruben, I was certain. I had pictured him in my mind often enough to know him anywhere. The pictures Nan sent identified his face, but I didn't believe that was even necessary. I'd know my son anywhere. I slowed and stopped right there on the street. The glimpse of my son, too, tempting to allow me to keep moving. I just watched as they interacted with each other, their friendship clear even from where I sat. Then, as I was about to pull away, I saw her. She came out of the house with 2 cans of soda for the boys, and I watched as they stopped their game and took the cans from her hands. Both were very careful, and I could see both as they nodded their thanks. She stood there, talking to them and looking around the yard. I was too far away to see much of her face, but I was surprised to see she was still wearing those tight jeans and that t-shirt I always loved. That memory hadn't gone far. Just as I was about to pull away, she turned and met my eyes. The tears that started when I first saw my son made things difficult to see clearly, but I could tell even from that distance that she recognized me. I panicked then and shoved my foot down on the gas pedal and raced away, my tires spewing gravel as they gained traction. I didn't let up until I was out of sight and back on the main road leading to my hotel. I was shaking, making driving difficult, so I slowed down and made my way carefully back to my room. I went inside and collected my thoughts until I felt calm. I decided then that a meal would allow me time to get control and figure out what to say when I called. That I had to do since I promised, and I would let her know I was here, and that I would pick Ruben up tomorrow after school. She trusted me with my son, and I was not going to jeopardize that trust now, not after seeing him today. So, I walked down to the lobby where a small restaurant was located. I went in and had a meal, eating most of it by instinct, not really tasting anything, just nourishment. By the time I got back to my room, it was past 9 and time to call. I sat, picked up the phone and dialed. It rang twice before she picked up. Hello? Hello, Nancy. It's me, Carmine. I'm here as promised, and I just wanted to let you know I'll pick up Ruben as we agreed. I guess I'll see you when you get home. Is that still okay with you? It's fine, Ruben. A slight hesitation, then, I saw you today, you know? That was you in the truck, wasn't it? Yes, Nan, it was me. I'm sorry for doing that, but I just had to see where you and Ruben were living. I panicked when you turned around and I left in a hurry. It's hard for me, sometimes, to remember that not everything I do that seems wrong is really wrong. Does that make any sense to you? I think so, but then I haven't had to live under the conditions you did for those 5 years. I guess it would make things strange at times. You have no idea, but it's not something I would encourage you to have to experience for yourself. No, anyway, I'll see you tomorrow. Is there anything I should bring or anything for me to worry about? Nothing at all, Carmine. Just be yourself. You're his father, and that's all that's important to him. He never blamed you, you know? The only thing he said when I explained to him what I did and why you reacted the way you did was, I don't blame Dad for doing what he did. He had to do it. That's what your son said, Carmine, and that's how he feels. Maybe it's a good thing that I did come, Nan. He has to understand that what I did was wrong. That's why I went to jail, because what I did was wrong. He has to know that. I don't want him to think what I did was heroic or right or justified. It wasn't. But Carmine, he understands that I was the one that caused you to act that way. It was not your fault, Carmine. It was mine, and he knows that. I told him what I did to you, and he understands. He knows, Carmine, I owed both of you the truth, so when he asked, I told him about Hugo and what we were doing when you came home. No, Nan, you're wrong. I'll talk to you tomorrow, both of you. I'll have to make you understand. Until then, good night. I hung up then, before I lost my temper. How could she be so blind? She must know that her act was never justification for almost killing another man. There are options. Violence is not one of them. I saw the result of violence at the hospital, and I riled against those who caused such damage to others. I called them vile names. I vented my anger on them and their wanton actions that caused such grief to others. I cursed them and their actions. Then I did the very thing I so hated in others. The very thing I was so much against. And how could she think I would put my son through the publicity and the recriminations that a trial would bring? Any actions she or I committed would reflect on our son, and even on Nancy herself as the facts came out in a public trial. She had to know that. How could she not? I slept poorly that night, keyed up by the thought of seeing and talking to my son for the first time in so long. And for what I had to make them understand about what I did and why I choose to go to jail. They had to understand before I could go back to my job and my new home. I had to make them see that I was the one that was wrong. I had to make them see. Meanwhile, Ruben, he called last night. I heard the phone ring and I knew it had to be him. He was here, in Groveport, and he had come to see me. After all this time, my dad was here and he was coming to see me. I wanted to answer the phone myself, but I knew Mom would have a fit if I did. She made me promise to wait and do it Dad's way. She told me that if I didn't do it that way, that Dad might just stay away. I thought she was crazy, but she did know him better than I did. So, I heard the phone ring and I just knew. I fell asleep thinking about what was going to happen tomorrow. The next day was one of the longest in my life. I told Eddie that Dad would pick us up after school, and then I was going to have some time alone with him, just the two of us, until Mom got home. Then we would all be together again, just like I remember from before. I did remember. I remembered Dad coming home all smelling like chemicals, his face all gray and tired, and then, once he had changed and had a shower, he was my dad again. I remembered we all laughed a lot, and Mom hardly ever got angry or cried like she does now a lot. And then it all changed. Dad went away, Mom cried all the time, and things were not so good anymore. Oh yes, I remembered. But finally, it was 3:30 and the bell rang for the last class of the day. I grabbed my books, slammed them in my locker, and spun the combination lock before heading to the huge double doors in the front of the school. They would be open now, and kids would be pouring out, heading home. I stopped by the display case just inside the doors to wait for Eddie. He finally came down the hall and, together, we ran out the front doors and down the 16 steps to the ground. Eddie and I ran out to the front of the school and stopped, looking around. Then I saw him. He was standing in front of an old red Ford pickup truck, one that looked to be a whole bunch of years old. But that was not important. What was important to me was that he was there. I knew him right away. I remembered him and I knew him right then. Come on, Eddie. There he is. There's my dad. Come on. I grabbed Eddie by the arm and started pulling him toward my dad. Dad watched us, then stepped away from the truck to wait for me to get there. When I did, I just stopped in front of him and stared at this man I hadn't seen in 7 years. He looked at me and smiled. Then, without warning, he grabbed me and wrapped his strong arms around me and lifted me right off the ground. He held me so tight I was having trouble breathing. Dad, come on, Dad. You're suffocating me. Put me down. I was laughing and crying at the same time, and I wasn't the least bit ashamed. This was my dad. He finally let me go, stepped back and said, "I'm sorry, son. I didn't mean to embarrass you. And who's your friend? Is this the famous Eddie?" Eddie puffed up his chest and said, "Hi, Mr. Montoya. It's good to meet you. I'm Eddie, Rube's best friend. Me and him are buddies, right, Rube?" I just nodded, still watching my dad. Finally, after all these years, he was here. I was still trying to catch my breath. He finally got us into the pickup and we took off, heading for the entrance to our place. Eddie came as far as the junction with us, and when Dad said he could drive Eddie the rest of the way, Eddie said no thanks, so Dad wouldn't see the place where he lived. Eddie was embarrassed by the fact his parents had money and we didn't, but I didn't think it was so bad. But that was Eddie's choice. I told him I would call later, and we drove the rest of the way home. Dad seemed to know right where to go, so we were home pretty quick. I spent the next couple of hours with Dad, just catching up and telling him all I could about me and Mom and what we had been doing since we moved. I didn't remember all that much about before that, but he didn't seem to care. He just seemed happy to listen to me, and I had no problem telling him everything I had been keeping inside until I could see him again. It was like a dam breaking. As we talked, I looked at him and tried to see him now compared to before. He was quieter now, not talking or laughing as much, and he seemed sadder somehow. He looked the same. Still tall at over 6 feet, not too heavy. His dark hair with a little gray now and his eyes not as bright as I remembered. But then I hadn't seen him for a long time, so maybe my memory was at fault. He sounded the same deep voice, the same laugh, the same grin when I was saying something funny or stupid. No, he was the same, but he was different too. He called to order pizza and we drank Pepsis and talked until Mom came home. I noticed Dad get real quiet when I told him I heard her car pull in. She was right on time, as usual. He stood up and watched as she put her key in the door and pushed it open. She came in, threw her keys on the small hall table as usual, slipped off her jacket and dropped her purse on the chair by the door. She didn't look up until she had done these routines. They just stood there, looking at each other, and I was about to say something to make the weirdness go away when the doorbell rang. I think it was the pizza guy. Meanwhile, Nancy. I was not much good all day today as I tried to put everything but my job out of my mind. It was not much use, since all I could think of was Ruben and his father. I knew this was a good thing for Ruben, and I knew that Carmine needed to see his son. I had no problem with that, and I was being honest when I said I would trust Ruben's life to Carmine. Carmine would never do anything to cause pain for Ruben. Even going to prison was to spare him the pain of seeing his father in jail. Carmine told me that, and I believed him. He gave up his freedom partly to spare his son. I looked again at the clock and saw that I had a little over an hour to go. I knew that they were together now, probably sitting at home and catching up on the past. Ruben had so much he wanted to tell his father, and so many things a son wanted to ask of his father. I was almost finished with the Labrador that I was working on, giving him a flea dip, trimming his coat, and cutting his nails. He was a sweetheart of a dog, and his patience was amazing. He just let me do as I wished and never gave me any problems. I was talking to him as I worked, and I believe he knew what I was saying. That was more than I could claim. As I put him in his holding cage until his master picked him up, I once again looked at the clock and saw that my time was up. I could go home and face my demons. I washed up, changed out of my smock, and put on my jacket. All routine things, and all mechanical. I said my goodbyes and headed out to drive the short distance home. It was time to face Carmine for the first time since he saw me with Hugo. I remembered that day so clearly. I tried over the years to forget it, but I had no luck. I couldn't get Carmine's eyes out of my head. That look of pain and cheating. God, why couldn't I forget it? After what it cost me, why was it still haunting me? I was so engrossed in my thoughts that I was almost unaware of where I was until I pulled into my driveway. The first thing I noticed was the red pickup truck sitting there. Carmine's? It had to be. Carmine with a pickup truck. Funny thing was that I could almost remember a time when Carmine had talked about owning a truck. Was that a memory? I believed it was. I turned off the ignition, got my purse and jacket, and sat there in my car, trying to get up the courage to go inside. For the first time, I realized that I hadn't thought to fix anything ahead of time for dinner. Should I have stopped for takeout? Should I have fixed something? What did Carmine like now? Had his tastes changed sign he was on his own? I shook my head and decided that I was just stalling. looking for any reason to not go inside my own home. I walked slowly to my door, used my key to open it, and walked in, dropping my keys and my jacket where I always did. I was hesitating, afraid to look up and see him standing there. How did I know he would be standing? He always stood when I came into the house. Always. He always did it at home. If I had been out and he was home, he would stand when I opened the door and came in. It was Carmine's way. I took a deep breath and looked up. He was standing there, in the doorway to the kitchen where he and Ruben had been sitting. I looked into his eyes and I saw my Carmine. He was still there. I don't know what I was expecting, but what I saw was my Carmine. Not the same man he was before. No, there were changes now. I saw that there was less happiness in his eyes. I saw a hint of pain, but a different kind of pain. I saw no sign of the spontaneity or the amusement that I had loved. They were no longer part of this new Carmine. No, Carmine was here, but he had changed. Only time would tell if those changes were permanent and if they were for the better. I was just about to say something. Anything to break the silence between us when the doorbell rang. I was so startled that I almost screamed out loud when Ruben said, "That's the pizza Dad ordered. Can you let him in, Mom?" Now let's listen the story from Carmine's perspective. The sound of the doorbell broke the tension and the silence that had fallen over Nancy and me. For my part, the shock of seeing her for the first time in all those long, difficult years was so intense that I was struck speechless. What I felt and what seeing her did to me was going to take some time to figure out. I know the first thing I felt was pleasure. That was a strange reaction to seeing the woman who had changed my life so much for the worse. I expected anger, resentment, maybe a little pain. But the only thing that I recognized was the pleasure. I'm sure the others were there. As a matter of fact, I was positive of it since I had experienced them all after I had first seen them last night. But that was before I was this close. As Nan turned toward the door and went to open it, I had a few seconds to catch my breath and calm myself down. I had to be very careful. I understood that my feelings were in chaos and my control was ragged at best. Sure, over the past 5+ years I had learned control and patience, but those were for things I could control. Things that were predictable and for which the rewards and consequences were clear. They never included wives, or ex-wives, or children, or any of those things that were part of a civilized life. Prison was far from civilized. It was dog-eat-dog where the strong survived and the weak succumbed, and the result was a culture that worked. Those with a skill or a talent or some degree of knowledge that could be bartered into something better were the winners. The weak or the ignorant looked to those others for their survival, often at the cost of something more precious, their dignity. I was one of the more fortunate, and I had learned to take advantage when it was to my benefit. Compassion was not a survival emotion in prison, and my compassion had been suppressed for a long time. My work at the clinic was slowly reviving that forgotten emotion, and I was trying very hard to remember. But this is how my mind was functioning now, and would dictate my actions toward Nan as this first meeting progressed. I know that sounds cold and distant, but my reality for 5 years, 6 months and 3 days was an 8 by 12-foot cell. My return to civilized behavior was not that easily accomplished for someone who lived alone the last 2 years. And during that time, my only contact with society was via a clinic that treated those whose own reality was filled with pain and sadness. As I watched Nan take the pizza and reach into her purse to pay the boy, I remembered my manners and walked toward her. "Please, Nan, I ordered pizza since Ruben mentioned it was one of his favorites, but I should have asked you first and I'm sorry. Here, I have the money." I handed the boy a 20 and told him to keep the change. Money was not a problem for me with what I was earning at the clinic and with my meager lifestyle. I had money, but no real life. Nancy had backed away and walked toward the kitchen with the pizza. I imagined she wanted the time as well to get a handle on her own feelings. Maybe this visit was a bad idea, but it was too late to worry about it now. Once the delivery boy had gone, I closed the door and walked into the kitchen where Ruben and his mother were already sitting down. I stood there for a second and then took the chair that was open. It was at the head of the table, and that made me uneasy. That should have been Nan's chair, not mine. But I was a guest and I had little choice in the matter since the only other vacant chair was holding the pizza box. Nancy got paper plates and set them in front of us. She opened the pizza and, using her fingers, took out slices for all of us. The first went to Ruben, who took it gleefully and rolled it into a sort of tube before taking his first bite. As she put mine on my plate, she looked briefly into my eyes, and once again, I felt a shudder of pleasure. She held my eyes for a second before turning away and sitting down in her own chair. I was left to wonder what I was seeing in those blue eyes. I knew once what she was thinking, but no longer. Not since that afternoon when I lost my mind and almost killed a man, and my world changed from the controlled, predictable life I once lived. I tried to put all of that aside as I continued my talk with Ruben. He was telling me about his friend and what their plans were for the coming summer break. They were planning on joining the Y swim team and entering into the competitions they held with other Ys. He said he and Eddie were pretty good swimmers, and he had high hopes of winning a few medals. I listened with minimal comment and enjoyed the sounds of my son once again. I had begun to realize what I had missed and what I almost deprived myself of by refusing to see them again. I thanked God that he had called and roused me from my self-imposed isolation. Ruben must have been wiser than his age when, after finishing off 3 slices of pizza, he said that he had to go over to Eddie's house for a project and that he would only be gone for about an hour. He told me not to leave before he got back, and I assured him I would wait. He looked at his mother, who smiled at him, kissed his forehead, and walked him to the door. She lowered her face to his ear and whispered something to him which caused him to blush and rush out the door. Instead of being interested in what they shared, I only saw the closeness between 2 people who loved each other. I had no interest in their shared secret, knowing what secrets were all about. I certainly had my own. As the door closed, Nancy turned to me and asked if I would like to join her in the small family room after she got some coffee for us. I nodded and moved into the room, noting the couch and the 2 side chairs. I took one of the side chairs and tried to get comfortable, but finally got up and took a seat on the couch. Those side chairs were damned uncomfortable to someone my size. Women's chairs. Meanwhile, Nancy. I was not surprised when Ruben said he was going over to Eddie's. I understood that he wanted to give me time with Carmine without him overhearing. I walked him to the door, whispered my gratitude in his ear, and made him blush. He couldn't get out of the door fast enough. I watched him go, then turned to Carmine and asked him to join me in the family room for coffee. I went into the kitchen, poured the coffee from the coffee maker into a decorative pitcher, and added 2 cups to the small tray I used. Carmine took his black, or at least he used to, and I used a small amount of cream. I fixed the cups and then carried the tray into the family room. I was pleased to see Carmine on the couch, and I sat the tray on the coffee table in front of him and joined him on the couch. We sat at opposite ends, of course. I had thought about this meeting so many times over the years. That it would happen was never in doubt, at least in my own mind. One way or the other, I was going to tell Carmine my side of the story and let him do as he would. I had practiced over and over the words I would say. They were burned into my memory and clear as a bell. Now was the time, and I had to begin. I handed him the cup of coffee, and when he took it, I placed my hand over his on the cup and looked into his eyes. I opened my mouth to begin the tale of what transpired that day, the story of what Hugo and I did and why we ended up in our bed, the whole sordid tale from the very beginning to the sad end. But that's not what came out. What I said after all that preparation was, "Carmine, I'm so sorry for what I did to you. Can you ever forgive me?" Now Carmine, when she sat down on the couch, I was initially uncomfortable, but when she sat so far away, I relaxed. Having her this close was more than I had anticipated. We were supposed to sit across the table from each other, our hands neatly folded in front of us, our faces relaxed and calm. I would tell her a little about my life with Jerry and what I was doing, and then she would begin to tell me how she had been and what she had been doing. Maybe some information on Ruben's life, and, well, that's what should have happened. What actually happened was that she blurted out, "Carmine, I'm so sorry for what I did to you. Can you ever forgive me?" Now, what was I supposed to do with that? How was I going to handle that? I had forgotten all of that years ago. I went to jail, but that was my decision and had little to do with her actions. Hell, I would have stayed and tried to work everything out if I hadn't lost it and almost killed that Hugo guy. I knew I had given her ample chances to do what she did. Working all those hours, leaving the raising of our son to her, running the house and living alone without a husband more often than not. And when I had a chance to change my lifestyle to one similar to what I was doing now, she let me turn it down. Why? because she believed I wanted to. Of course, she shouldn't have done it at all, but I had given her reason. I wasn't the type to say, divorce the 304. Kick her cheating bum out. Look at me. I'm so perfect. I could never do what she did. Sure, I could have done that. I could have been a hypocrite and done the high and mighty thing. She had cheated, yes, but so what? We could deal with it. I loved her and I believe she loved me, so there had to be a reason for her doing what she did. I never asked her to explain it. And why would I destroy the home my son had come into and was an integral part of? Why would I break up our family? Because of my pride? My macho feelings? Maybe some would, but I loved my son and I loved my wife, so what would give me the right to destroy all of that for my own pride? She was looking at me with a look of surprise on her face. Her words must have surprised her as much as they did me. I had to answer her. I had to say something. I closed my mouth and tried to find the words that would answer her question. I mentally shrugged my shoulders and thought to myself, just go with it and see what happens. I put my cup down, leaned toward her and said, I forgave you years ago, Nan. I didn't go to jail to punish you. It was to punish myself for what I did. You have to understand that. I went to jail because I almost killed a man, regardless of what he did. No man deserves to die for that, and if you hadn't stopped me, I would have killed him. Her eyes got so wide, and her mouth opened up in that cute little O that they talk about. I had no idea what she was thinking, but I hoped she understood what I was trying to say. I certainly didn't want her to blame herself anymore. She wasn't at fault for what I did. As a matter of fact, at the time all the attorneys wanted me to plead temporary insanity or diminished capacity, so what I did couldn't have been her fault. No, if I had been in my sound mind, I probably would have hit the roof in anger, yelled a lot, threatened the SOB, or done something similar. I might even have been so angry that I would have divorced her anyway, but I doubt it. I just know I wouldn't have tried to kill him with my son's ball bat. I'm sorry that I couldn't talk to you then, Nan. I know what you tried to do for me and I appreciate it. I know that you wanted me to plead not guilty, but I couldn't do that. I would have killed him, Nan. I would have continued to hit him with that bat until I collapsed. You stopped me, otherwise I would have continued. When I woke up from whatever funk I was in, I realized what I almost did, and it left me paralyzed with fear that I could do something like that. Even to you and Ruben. And I couldn't put you and Ruben through a trial that would have brought out my actions and put you on trial as well. The press would have had a field day with that. Doc's wife caught with lover. Doc goes nuts. I couldn't do that to Ruben or even to you. No, Nan, what I did was what I had to do. You must understand that. How could I let my son see me in that light? His friends at school taunting him about his nutty father or his 304 mother. Face it, Nan, they would have used those terms and you know it. I wasn't nuts and you weren't a 304. What I did was what I had to do. I paid for my crime and now it's done. It's over and I just want to get on with my life and learn to live in society again. And I want to get to know my son again. I've missed so much. Nancy had listened patiently while I said my piece. Parts of it hurt her. I could tell by the way her lips quivered and the winces that she gave at certain parts. But I was only telling her how I felt. I was being truthful, and sometimes the truth hurts. Now it was her turn. I heard the words that Carmine spoke with equal parts of sadness and shock. I heard him say that he blamed himself for what he did. It was news to me that he felt that way at all, since the lawyers had convinced me that he wasn't guilty of trying to kill Hugo because he was truly impaired in his judgment because of the extended hours he was working. Even the DA said so, but he couldn't do anything when Carmine decided to plead guilty. But I could see his side of things as well. Carmine was a doctor who practiced medicine because he wanted to help people. Money was never his motivator, and he was well paid only because he was so good at what he did. Carmine would look at what he did with horror and take full responsibility for it without considering the cost to himself. That was who Carmine was. That was who he was all those years ago and who he still was. But what was most important to me was that Carmine put me and Ruben first in his life when all this happened. He put us first and went to jail to spare us. God, what that did to me was almost enough to drive me insane. He forgave me years ago. How could he have done that? What I did wasn't so easy to forgive. I hadn't even succeeded in doing that for myself. That made me stop and think of what Carmine had been living with all these years. He felt he was guilty and that he had gone to jail to atone for his sin. But the sin was mine. If I hadn't been with Hugo that day, none of this would have happened. Carmine had to know that. I could see that Carmine had said what he wanted to say. Now, it seemed he was giving me my chance to say all the things I wanted to say to him all those years ago. I sat up straight on the couch, turned to face him and began. Carmine, I have to tell you that you were wrong. This was never your fault. I was the one that started the chain of events that ended with you going to jail. It was my fault that Hugo was there in our bedroom. It was my fault that we were in bed with each other. It was my fault, Carmine, and you were just caught up in my cheating. I knew what I was doing and I knew that it was wrong. I know that and I apologize to you for everything you had to go through because of me. When I saw you there, that bat in your hand and the look on your face, I knew in that instant that my life was over. I was afraid that you were going to kill Hugo with that bat, and that's why I jumped you. I couldn't let you go to jail for something that was my fault. I knew then that I had made a horrible mistake. I knew it, and I had to stop you from killing him. Not to save him, but to save you. But when I saw your eyes, I became afraid. You were someone else then. That was what I told the lawyer, and he agreed that you were not yourself. Why didn't you let us save you from prison, Carmine? Why? Why did you give up your son and your freedom for something I did? Carmine listened to me, his face calm and his eyes warm. He listened and he heard me, of that I was certain, but he was shaking his head, denying my words. I had to try again. Please, Carmine. I know I hurt you and I hurt our family. Ruben had to pay the price for what I did. I paid a terrible price as well, but that was only right. I was guilty, not you. I can't forgive myself for what I did to you and the price you had to pay for it. I'll never forgive myself. Nancy, you must forgive yourself. I was the one that failed you and Ruben. I should have stayed and faced you and worked with you to save our family. Maybe it wouldn't have worked and we would have separated anyway. Perhaps that was what was needed, but I didn't. I took a bat and tried to kill a man instead of working within the laws of reason to find a better way. And what I said about the papers was true. I spared you and Ruben the humiliation of a trial that would have had to happen once that man recovered. And they would have been vicious to all of us. I couldn't let that happen to Ruben or even to you. And please, Nan, forgive yourself. I have forgiven you. I have even learned to forgive myself for what I did. I looked into his eyes and I believed him. He had forgiven me and himself, and he was at peace with what happened. But now a new thought occurred to me. How did he feel about me? Was that selfish? Was that thought not worthy of me at that time? He was here to see his son, not me. I knew that. But the thought nagged at me, and I searched my heart for the courage to ask, Carmine, can I say something to you now? Something that you may rather not hear? Carmine looked at me with a smile and nodded his head. Say anything, Nan, and I'll listen. And I'll try to answer any questions you may have. I still love you as much as I did before, Carmine. I never stopped, and there has never been anyone else for me before or since. Hugo had nothing to do with my love for you. You can believe that. And now for the real question. Carmine was just watching me, his eyes giving nothing away. I had to ask, can I ask how you feel about me, Carmine? Carmine continued to look at me, his eyes giving away nothing. As I began to fidget, nervously awaiting his answer, he rose and walked toward the window, looking out toward the street. He began, his back to me and his posture reflecting a sort of firmness. Maybe he was about to tell me that he no longer had any feelings for me. Well, I wouldn't be surprised and I wouldn't blame him. But that's not what he said. Nancy, how I feel is rather complicated. I never stopped loving you or Ruben when I made my decision to go to jail. I did that for the reasons I gave you. I believed I was doing the right thing for us as a family. I did that out of love for both of you. You have to understand that. But, at the same time, even though I took responsibility for putting you in a position to cheat on me, I still fail to understand why you did that. I have finally found peace with myself and with your actions, but the pain took a long time to heal. I needed that time and so did you. So, in my own mind, our marriage had to end. It was time. The conditions were not going to change, and what happened was inevitable. No, Carmine, no. I did something that I still can't explain to you. I was the one that cheated you and our family. It was me, Carmine, and only me. I know how you feel about what you did, but you have to see it was my actions that put you into that situation. You would never hurt anyone. Never. You were so tired and your mind was so fatigued that when you saw me betraying you, you just snapped. That was all my fault and mine alone. That situation will never happen again. Never. Carmine was shaking his head, but he did turn and look at me again. His eyes were filled with tears that he refused to shed. I felt a need to go to him and take him into my arms and just hold him, but I was terrified to move. Not fear of Carmine, but fear of his reaction. I couldn't bear to have him reject me. That would kill me. No, Nan, our marriage had to end. We had grown apart, with my hours and you hating to be alone. Ruben was all that was holding us together then. I was so into my work at the hospital that I often failed to think of either of you until I was on my way home. To me, that was wrong. You and Ruben should have been my first priority always. My job should have been only that, a job. I've come to understand that, and now I'm doing what I should have been doing before. I work at a job I like, but the job is not my life. But where does that leave us, Carmine? What do we do now? Just see each other when you come to see Ruben, or when I come to get him. After all we were to each other, is that all that's left? I can't believe that, Carmine. I just can't. You and I are two different people now, Nan. How do we know how we'll feel after a while? You are remembering me as I was. I'm no longer the same man. I've learned things no civilized man should know, and I sometimes react in inappropriate ways. I can be dangerous to those around me. I have to remember every day that I'm free to do as I wish. That is an awesome responsibility for someone who never had to face restrictions and responsibilities. I always had it easy, and when it came time to act responsibly and do the right thing, I almost killed a man without thinking. I should have been thinking about you and Ruben and my responsibilities, and I failed you. Carmine, you have been around others who also failed, and you now believe that you will fail again. I don't believe that. You've changed, Carmine. I can see it in your eyes. You're the same man I knew and loved, and that hasn't changed. You may think different, but I know better. You weren't in your right mind when you did the things you did. And as for Ruben and me, you never failed us. I certainly did, and that is the truth, but not you. You were doing what you loved, and when someone needed you, you went. I should have honored my vows to you to remain faithful, and I didn't. To this day, I don't know why, other than letting myself drink too much when with another man who turned out to be a predator. That was my failing, Carmine, not yours. And just so you know, Carmine, Hugo promised to come after you when you got out. He was talking about civil court and suing you for all he could get. That's another thing for which I'm responsible. So you see, you didn't fail us, I did. Carmine and I talked for the rest of the evening, until Ruben came back. We resolved nothing, but we did begin to understand each other better. It was strange, partly because at times it seemed so natural for him to be sitting there talking to me. At other times, the differences between the man he was and was now came through. I found the new Carmine to be as wonderful as the older version, but that was because I still loved the memory. Carmine was trying to make me see that. Carmine and Ruben spent another hour together, talking about what they had been doing, and it was wonderful to see the bond that still existed between father and son. For some reason, that hit me harder than anything, knowing I was responsible for breaking that bond in the first place. But at least it wasn't a permanent thing. Ruben finally began to show his age as his eyes began to close in spite of his protestations that he wasn't tired. I knew he had not slept last night, and it was catching up with him now. Carmine saw it as well and urged Ruben to go to bed. He promised that he would still be around for the next few days. Ruben finally left, grinning after Carmine hugged him and I kissed his cheek. Well, Nancy, I should be going. What is your schedule like for tomorrow? I'd like to spend some more time with both of you, of course, but you and I should talk some more. I'll get Ruben off to school, and then I'll call in for time off. I have a lot of vacation time coming, so it should be no problem. Is that okay with you? That would be perfect. I could take you out for breakfast if you'd like to go. Any time is fine with me. Why don't you pick me up about 8:30? We can get breakfast and then spend some more time talking. Perfect. Carmine rose and headed toward the door. I followed behind, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Whatever it was, I was prepared for it, and I had hopes that things could continue to develop. But that was only my hope. I had no idea of what Carmine wanted. I stopped, watching as he opened the door. He turned, looked back at me and said, "This went better than I had hoped. Thank you for seeing me and thank you for making Ruben into the fine young man he is. Good night and I'll see you tomorrow." With that, he was gone. This time, I knew he'd be back. Meanwhile, Carmine. As I drove back to the motel, I reviewed the entire evening in my mind. Ruben was a great boy, and I was impressed with both him and his initiative. There was little question that Nancy had raised him well and had instilled a lot of wonderful qualities in him. I enjoyed my time with him, and I knew that I could never walk away from him again. I was in his life to stay now. Nancy was just as I remembered her. She looked exactly as she did back then, and if possible, she had become even more beautiful. And for my information, she never dated or saw other men socially. That was interesting. But, as I told her, and as I fully believed, our marriage had to be ended. We really were two different people now. But that begged the question, how did I feel about her now? I had struggled for the past several years with that question, long before I came to meet them, and didn't want to face the answer. But I knew the answer as soon as she walked in that door today. Well, that was for another discussion. Tomorrow was just to find my son and his mother again. Back at the motel, I picked up the phone and placed a call. It was to a contact number I was given by my erstwhile friend Pan. Pan and I had become friends in prison when he developed a problem that I was able to diagnose. I talked to the prison doctor who knew my background and recommended to him the proper course of treatment. It involved some laser surgery to reattach a torn retina, but it was relatively straightforward, and he was able to schedule it for Pan. Pan, who believed he was going blind, was grateful and promised to pay me back someday. Well, what I wanted was fairly simple, so I told the man at the other end of the phone who I was, who had given me the number, and all he said was, "Whatever you need, consider it done." I then gave him Hugo Bentz's name and previous location and told him that Hugo had promised to sue me in civil court and that I would appreciate anything he could do to make that not happen. I offered to pay him the going rate for whatever he did, and he simply said, "No charge. Pan said to take care of you." As I said, "Consider it done. Thanks, and please give my regards to Pan. I'm still on probation and I can't contact him. Will you do that? Consider it done." A man of few words, but they were words I wanted to hear. He hung up and that was that. See? What did I tell you? Prison friends are not like any other friends you'll ever make. Those friends are forever, and when they say they'll be there for you, they mean it. All I have to give if called upon is money, but believe me, if one of them asks, I'll answer. And like the man at the other end of the phone, no questions asked. I never heard a word from Hugo Bentz, then or later. Meanwhile, Ruben. "Hey, Rube, you going to your pops this weekend? And what's up with your mom and dad now? Anything happening?" Eddie was tossing a ball into the air and pretending it was a fly ball, and he was able to snatch it with his glove. He was looking up at the ball as he asked. We were walking toward the ballpark and hoping to get into a pickup game. Eddie was really good and wanted to play for the majors someday. I guess he had a chance. Well, I don't know for sure, Eddie, but they've been spending a lot of time together lately. Dad came down last weekend and he and Mom went out to dinner again. They do that a lot, maybe to get away from me. I don't mind because I like it that they get together. Maybe they're doing it. What do you think? Eddie was laughing, and I decided not to take him seriously. If I did, I'd have to hit him. He didn't duck or anything, so I took it as a funny comment. Nah, they don't even stay out that late. They always come home pretty early and pick me up from Mrs. Evans' place. We sometimes go out for ice cream before Dad goes back to his motel. Mom keeps asking him to stay, but he won't. I even told him I'd give him my bed and sleep on the floor in my sleeping bag, but he says that it's best if he stays at the motel. I don't see why. When I go to see him, I have my own room in his place. Yeah, his place. What's it like? Is it neat? I bet he has a huge place all by himself. I've only been there twice, and actually it's pretty much of a dump. It's in a real bad part of town, and it's real old and run down. His stuff is okay, and the big screen TV is really cool, but the rest is like his truck, just cheap and old and used. But it's okay with me just to be with him. We go lots of places and I go with him when he stops in at his clinic. He's part owner, Cool, dude. Hey, come on. I see some guys ready to play some ball. Come on, Rube. Let's get there before they choose up sides. I followed Eddie to the park, and decided to sit the first game out. Eddie just shrugged his shoulders and went out to play center field. I sat down on the bench and watched. I was thinking of the question Eddie asked about my folks. I knew that Mom wanted to have Dad come home to stay with us, but I knew Dad was not ready to do that. Mom was happier now that Dad was with us, even part-time. She dressed a lot nicer. She took more care of herself and even did something with her hair. It seemed lighter now, and it was a lot prettier. Even I could see that. Dad told me a couple of times that he wanted to be part of the family again, and that he wanted to spend more time with both of us. I thought that was a good sign and asked him if he and Mom were going to get married again, so we could all be together. He didn't answer right away, but I saw his smile before he said that it was possible. I thought that was a good sign too, but maybe it will take more time. I don't know. I just hoped that it would happen. As I thought about it, I was pretty sure things would work out. Just then, Eddie called me and told me to take first base. The kid playing first had to go home for some reason, so I grabbed my mitt and took my place. I stopped thinking of my parents when the first ball was hit right to me. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.